I used to think the scariest thing in my house was the silence. Until that night. I hid behind the cupboard during my stepsister's celebration party and heard my stepfather whisper, "Let her fall down the stairs. As long as she doesn't die, we're fine." Hours later, I lay at the bottom of the stairs, bleeding from my ear, unable to speak. They thought I'd stay silent forever, but I recorded everything, and I made the whole school hear it from the mouth of a sculpture. If you think this is just another family story, you're dead wrong. Subscribe now, because the next episodes will chill you even deeper. Before everything collapsed, I truly believed that if I stayed quiet and obedient, my family wouldn't hurt me. I was wrong, and the price I paid was my own voice. When people ask me about my freshman year, I don't tell them about the textbooks or the teachers or the first boy who tried to flirt with me during earth science. I tell them nothing, because the real story doesn't fit into a clean memory. It starts in a living room that always smelled like cold leather and lemon polish. It starts with a laugh I didn't recognize as mine, and it starts like most betrayals do with family. My name is Quinn, and when I was 14, I learned that silence isn't always safety, it's sometimes the cage they build for you. That night was supposed to be a celebration. Margot, my older sister by name but not blood, had just secured an early academic endorsement from the state, something to fast-track her for Ivy League admission. She was radiant. Perfect posture, perfect curls, perfect GPA. And there I was setting out paper plates and folding napkins like a paid caterer. The guests were family friends, school board members, dean's colleagues from the district office. I knew all their names, though none of them ever remembered mine. I didn't mind not at first. That kind of invisibility felt like protection, like armor. Margot moved through the crowd like she was born for it. Her laugh was calibrated, her compliments rehearsed. And Dean, my stepfather, stood beside her with a glass of wine and a hand that always hovered just too tightly on her shoulder. My mom drifted between groups, smiling like a ghost, always just one compliment behind Margot's orbit. I slipped out of the way I always did behind the kitchen counter into the hallway, until I found myself tucked inside the narrow cabinet alcove between the living room and the stairwell. Not really a hiding place, just a pause. I'd brought my phone, of course. I always did. Not to text anyone. I didn't really have people. But sometimes I opened the voice memo app and recorded the way people talked, how they said things when they thought no one was really listening. It started as a writing exercise for poetry. I told myself it still was. But that night when I pressed record, it wasn't for writing. It was instinct. I heard Dean's voice first low and sharp. "She can't compete with you, you know that, right?" Margot laughed. "She won't. She barely even speaks in class. Still, the scholarship committee doesn't know that. If she submits, it splits the spotlight." There was the clink of a wine glass being set down. My breath caught. "What are you suggesting?" Margot asked, half amused. "A stumble. Something minor. Enough to disqualify. A fall on the stairs, maybe. You remember last year? Slippery wood. No rail." "She'd freak out," Margot said, but not like someone disturbed. More like someone weighing options. "What if she tells—" Dean snorted. "Ivy." "She barely tells us what she wants for dinner." Silence followed, long enough to make me wonder if I'd imagined it all. Then Dean added, a little blood, some concern. "You come out looking like the Stepsister, caring, worried. It's not a lie, it's just strategic narrative." "Strategic narrative," Margot repeated like she was tasting it. Then she giggled. Something inside me snapped quiet. Not rage, not fear, just disbelief turned inward. And I knew I didn't matter. Not in the way I thought. They didn't see me as a person. I was a variable in a spreadsheet they were trying to control. A scribble in the margins. A rough draft. I didn't realize I'd stopped breathing until the door to the living room opened and footsteps approached the hallway. I pressed stop on the recording and clutched the phone to my chest. My heartbeat filled my ears. Ivy. It was Margot. I stepped out slowly, pretending I'd just come from the bathroom. My voice caught in my throat when I tried to say her name, but I managed to smile. She looked at me, eyes bright, lashes long, nothing out of place. "You all right?" she asked, too sweet. "You look pale." "I'm fine," I said, though something inside me had already started screaming. Dean appeared behind her. His wineglass was gone. His eyes scanned me once like he was measuring dimensions. "Careful on the stairs, all right," he said, almost too casually. "They get slick when you're not paying attention." I nodded. That was the last thing I remember clearly. The fall wasn't cinematic. It wasn't loud. It was quick. 3 steps from the top, a heel turned sideways, and gravity did the rest. My body twisted, my elbow cracked against wood, my head hit the banister. Then silence, then blood. Not much, just enough to paint the edge of the step crimson. But what came after was worse, a pop in my right ear followed by the terrifying, nauseating absence of voice, my own voice. They said I screamed, they said I called for help, but I don't remember that. I only remember the white-hot pain behind my eyes, the taste of metal in my mouth, the smell of lemon polish and blood. When I woke up in the hospital, Margot was already there. She tripped, she said, before anyone could ask. Dean was next to her, scared us to death. My mom stood at the corner of the room. Her eyes were red, but she hadn't been crying. She just looked tired. The doctor said I'd suffered a mild concussion and a vocal cord trauma from the impact and shock. Temporary aphonia, they called it. Loss of voice. It might take weeks to return. Could be longer. Might never be quite the same. Dean made a joke about how the house would be quieter now. Margot laughed. I didn't. Later that night, I lay in bed staring at the water-stained ceiling of the hospital room. My phone sat on the tray beside me, screen cracked from the fall. The voice memo was still there. I hadn't lost it, but something else had been lost. Not just my voice, not just the last shards of trust. I'd lost the illusion that silence was safety, that being quiet meant I'd be left alone. They didn't leave me alone, they just counted on me never speaking. They were wrong. That was the moment I stopped being a rough draft. That was the night I started writing my real story, one wordless, breathless, blood-warm line at a time. The silence followed me home like a shadow. Not the kind of silence that comes with peace or rest. This silence was jagged. It rubbed at the edges of my thoughts, made everything sound like it was coming from underwater. My voice was gone, but the world kept speaking without me, sharp, fast, careless. It had been 6 days since the fall. 6 days of antibiotics, whispered hospital corridors, and nods I didn't return. The doctor's words still clung to my mother's voice when she spoke to me. It might take time. The vocal cords need rest. She should recover. But there was something else in my mother's tone, a clipped politeness, a tension that curled at the edges of her mouth like smoke. She hadn't looked me in the eyes since we got home. Neither had Dean, and Margot was radiant. She floated through the house like she'd won something. Maybe she had. At dinner, no one said anything about the accident. Instead, they talked about Margot's scholarship interview, her latest essay being shortlisted for a youth writing prize. I sat at the end of the table, head tilted slightly to listen, pretending the food didn't taste like ash. When my spoon clattered onto the plate, Dean flinched. "Be careful, Ivy," he said. "Don't push yourself." Margot didn't look up from her salad. She just smirked barely. I wanted to scream. Not words, just something. A sound, a note, a defiant rasp. But all I could do was breathe tight and shallow. My voice had evaporated into memory, and somehow I got the sense they preferred it that way. Later that night, I tried mouthing words in the mirror. I used to think language was made of sound. I was wrong. Language is breath and muscle and memory. I mouthed, "No, stop, it's not an accident." My reflection looked back like it didn't believe me. I downloaded an app called Speak Up, one of those text-to-voice programs that reads what you type. The voices were robotic, stilted, but they were loud. I chose one named Ava, calm, slightly flat, neutral in tone. It wasn't my voice, but it didn't stutter. It didn't vanish when fear pressed against my chest. At school, I wore a whiteboard on a lanyard. Most teachers knew what happened. A few students stared, but no one asked questions. I wrote what I needed, held it up, and they nodded like it was normal. I became background again. But this time, I paid attention. That's when I heard her name, Ms. Verna. It was during second period biology. The teacher had stepped out and two girls near the window were gossiping in whispers that weren't nearly as quiet as they thought. "She was here last year, right?" one said, clicking her pen against her notebook. Ms. Verna, yeah, the one who called out the principal, said he was playing favorites with Margot and the bored kids. What happened to her? She left. Or got pushed out. I heard they said she had a mental health leave after a disciplinary hearing. Yeah, but like no one saw her again. That was the first crack in the surface. Ms. Verna. A name I hadn't heard in months. I barely remembered her, just the scent of peppermint gum and the way she always called roll with too much enthusiasm. But now the way they said her name, like a warning, like a missing poster, you didn't forget that. I spent my lunch in the library that day. Not reading, watching, listening. Mrs. Gardner, the librarian, gave me a soft smile when I walked in. "Welcome back, Ivy," she said, like I'd just returned from a long vacation. I nodded and took a seat near the back between the non-fiction and art history sections where the ventilation buzzed and no one bothered to whisper. That's where I taught myself to read lips. It started with Mr. Campbell, the science teacher, speaking to Coach Reese. I couldn't hear what they said, but I caught phrases like "still no word from Verna" and "she pushed too hard." My heart locked onto that name again like a magnet. I watched videos later that night. Lip-reading tutorials, facial muscle movements, shadowed vowels, and silent consonants. I practiced on YouTube videos, turned off the sound, slowed down, playback, tried to translate. It was messy at first, like trying to decode static. But soon I picked out patterns, small movements, the way lips stretched around certain syllables. I replayed every moment I could remember in my head, the party, the hallway, the hospital room, and I realized I hadn't needed to hear Margot and Dean that night. I could have read what they said. The betrayal was written all over their mouths. That night, I sat on my bed with the window cracked just enough to let the cold October air seep in. I opened my notes app and typed, "Silence is also a crime, especially when it's the one they want from you." Then I opened Speak Up and played it back, the voice echoing into the stillness of my room. It didn't sound like me. It sounded stronger. The next day at school, I tested it. I typed a greeting and let Ava's voice say it aloud when a teacher called on me. It turned heads, not in a cruel way, just confused, intrigued. At lunch, I passed by the art wing and saw a flyer pinned to the corkboard. Voiceless, a mixed media exhibition. Submission deadline November 3rd. There was a quote underneath in faded ink art, "Is how we scream without breaking." I stared at the flyer for a long time. Then I tore a corner from my notebook and wrote, "I want in." I slid it under the classroom door. In English, we were assigned a personal essay, what I wish I could say. Most kids groaned. I smiled. Back home, things stayed tense. Dean barely acknowledged me. My mom floated in and out, asking if I was taking vitamins if I needed help with homework. But she never mentioned the fall. She never asked why I slept with my bedroom door locked. One evening, I walked downstairs to grab a glass of water and heard her on the phone, her voice low. "I don't know what to do, Janice. She's not speaking, and Dean says we can't revisit the whole thing. It'll hurt Margot's image right before interviews." There it was. Margot's image. Not my injury, not my voice. She hung up when she heard my footsteps and turned like I'd caught her stealing. "Ivy," she said, "you scared me." I held up the glass and pointed to the sink. She smiled, then added, "Try not to stay up too late. Sleep helps with healing." But she never said I'm sorry, never said I believe you. And I realized then maybe she didn't know everything, but she knew enough to stay silent, enough to look away. That made her complicit. Silence, I thought again, is also a crime. That night, I opened a blank document on my laptop and typed 2 columns: left names, events, rumors, right questions. At the top, I wrote, "Find Verna." If she had spoken up and been erased, then I needed to know why, how, and where she went. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. I wanted to hold it in my hands, sculpt it into something visible, something undeniable. Maybe even something that could speak for me. It started with a name in pencil. Faint, half erased, like someone wanted to forget but couldn't quite bring themselves to. E. Durant. It was written in the margin of an old college preparation guide in the back of the school library under a question about essay formatting. I had only picked up the book because someone left it open on the cart by the librarian's desk. On instinct, I flipped to the back page and found more names. 3 all in the same hurried handwriting: E. Durant, L. Keene, Maya S. I didn't recognize them at first, but something about the way they were grouped, no commas, just slashes between them like they'd been categorized together, filed away, forgotten. I took the book to a corner table and opened my phone. The school archives weren't public, but a few articles from past student newspapers lived online in clunky PDFs and pixelated headlines. I started searching. E. Durant had won the regional poetry contest in 2020, judged by the same board that now sponsored the state scholarship. L. Keene had been class president for 2 years before suddenly stepping down her senior year. No explanation. Maya S. was harder to find. Just one blurry photo from a club awards night standing behind Margot, almost cropped out. Each one had at some point been a contender for the exact scholarship Margot was now a finalist for. Each one had vanished, not from the school but from visibility. No features, no articles, no records of actual applications submitted to the Scholarship Foundation. It was like they'd been erased, not failed. And now I knew better than to believe in coincidence. I sat there, my fingers trembling against the plastic case of my phone, and scrolled through a forum thread from 2 years ago. A student had posted about being removed from a nomination list without warning. The post had no replies, just a downvote. Underneath the chair, my bag buzzed softly. I pulled out the text-to-speech device and typed, 3 before me, how many more? Ava's voice echoed faintly in the silence of the library, too low for anyone to hear. But I heard it, like a thread tightening. It wasn't paranoia, it was a pattern. I returned the book to the shelf, but didn't push it all the way in. Instead, I scanned the shelf for more books that looked worn, older than the rest used, but overlooked. And that's when I found it. Tucked behind 2 oversized yearbooks and a damaged thesaurus, a red leather-bound notebook. No label on the spine pages, uneven like it had been handled too many times. I hesitated before pulling it out. It felt deliberate, its hiding place, its position behind the noise. The cover creaked when I opened it. Inside were pages of tight, careful cursive. Lists, margins scribbled with dates, names, acronyms I didn't recognize. But on the second page, I saw a header written in all caps, flagged, Potential Interventions. And under that, a name I knew too well, Ivy Quinn. I froze. For a full minute, I just stared at it. Then my eyes dropped to the author's name on the inside cover. Verna A. Holloway. Ms. Verna. I turned page after page, trying not to shake. Every 3rd or 4th entry described a student, achievements, vulnerabilities, observations. Then a notation removed from shortlist after private meeting with DB Dean Burton, my stepfather. Some names had stars beside them, some had question marks, a few were crossed out entirely. There were notes in the margins too, warned once during staff meeting, told to focus on curriculum, not undermining system integrity. Filed preliminary report with district board. No response. Meeting with Coleman 10-3. Likely to be silenced. Prepare statement. The last entry read, I fear I've made myself too visible. But if anyone finds this, please don't let it be for nothing. Start with Maya. She saw everything. I wanted to cry. Not because it hurt, though it did, but because someone had tried. Someone had seen it all before me, tried to stop it, and had been erased for it, just like the others. Ms. Verna hadn't been weak. She'd been outnumbered. I pulled my phone out, opened the camera, and started taking photos page by page, hand shaking. I didn't have time to scan or transcribe. I just needed to capture it, store it. Then I thought better. If someone had found this once, they could find it again. So I opened my encrypted backup app, an old tool I used for creative writing drafts, and created a new file. I named it Mosaic. Inside, I uploaded every photo, then set a biometric lock. Only my thumbprint and passphrase could open it. Passphrase, my silence is theirs. I slid the notebook back behind the yearbooks, placed the thesaurus at a slightly new angle, and stood. On the way out, I nearly collided with Mrs. Gardner. Sorry, Ivy, she said, adjusting the books in her arms. Everything all right? I nodded, typed quickly on my phone. Old essay prompts, doing research. She smiled. Dig deep. That's where the good stuff hides. I smiled back, but it didn't reach my eyes. As I stepped into the hallway, the image of my name in Verna's notebook burned behind my eyelids. Someone had marked me long before I realized I was a threat. Maybe not to Margot directly, but to the machine that surrounded her. The school wasn't broken. It was built that way. That night I had a dream. Ms. Verna sat across from me in an empty classroom, the chalkboard behind her clean, untouched. She looked exactly as I remembered, salt and pepper hair in a low bun, eyes sharp but kind. She leaned forward and said without moving her mouth, You're not the first, but you might be the last if you don't act. When I woke up, I wrote it down on the inside of my sketchbook, then circled it in red. That morning, I skipped breakfast and took the long route to school, past the row of houses that led toward the park where Maya's photo had been taken. I didn't know what I was looking for yet, but I knew where to start. Not in the principal's office, not with the board, but with the ghosts Verna had left behind, names that deserved to be said out loud again. Stories no longer filed in the dark, and I would be the one to read them. It was a rainy Thursday when I found the music box. The kind of rain that didn't scream, it whispered. Tapped at windows like an invitation to stay quiet, stay inside. That morning, Margot had left early for her prep course in the city. Dean followed soon after, buttoning his collar like someone performing decency. My mom lingered in the kitchen, swirling tea in silence. I said nothing, typed nothing. Just sat through breakfast and watched the steam rise from her cup, curling like smoke from something that had already burned. Later, when the house emptied, I went upstairs, not to my room, but hers. I hadn't stepped foot in my mother's bedroom in over a year. Not since she started locking it with absent-minded fingers. But that day the door was open a crack. On instinct, I pushed. The light was gray through the curtains, soft enough to make everything look frozen in place. Her perfume still lingered, floral, expensive old. A framed photo of her and Dean sat crooked on the nightstand. They looked younger, smug, like people who thought time owed them good things. I wasn't looking for anything. That's important. I didn't come in with a plan or a motive. I just moved like breath, light, silent. Drawers half opened, a sweater unfolded and folded again. Her jewelry box hadn't been touched in weeks. And then in the back corner of the tall dresser, hidden beneath scarves in a satin pouch, I saw it. A wooden music box carved with vines and stars. One of those turnkey ones. I remembered it faintly from childhood. My mother used to let me wind it on Sunday mornings. It played a brittle melody I could never name. I opened it. At first, I thought it was broken. The music didn't play. The wheel jammed. But beneath the velvet lining, there was a bump, an uneven edge. I peeled the fabric back with my fingernail. And there it was. A red USB drive. No label, just a tiny, permanent marker scrawl at the edge. Verna, V1. My fingers went cold. I didn't think, I ran. Back to my room, shut the door, turned the lock, slid my laptop out from under my bed and clicked it open. The screen blinked to life, humming low like it knew something I didn't. I plugged the drive in. There was only one file, a video. No title, no metadata. Just a file time-stamped 2 years ago during the fall semester of my 7th grade year. The year Ms. Verna stopped showing up. I double-clicked. The screen opened to a dimly lit room, wood-paneled beige carpet, a long conference table with name tags. The kind of space where secrets are mistaken for policy, where people nod instead of listen. Verna sat at the head of the table, hair tied back, glasses lowered. Her voice was steady, but her hands flexed slightly on the table. I'm asking that we re-review the removed applicants from the fall recommendation cycle, she said. I've cross-checked scores, teacher referrals, and extracurricular logs, and I believe we've misrepresented eligibility criteria for at least 4 students. Silence. One man shifted in his chair. Then a familiar voice. Dean. Ms. Holloway, these matters were already closed. They were closed without oversight, Verna replied. There are discrepancies in how student applications were filtered. Discrepancies that align too closely with personal associations to be ignored. A pause. Dean leaned forward. You're implying misconduct. I'm stating it. Then came the voice I didn't expect. A woman's voice. Calm. Velvet smooth but sharp enough to slit paper. You're digging your own grave, Verna, the voice said. The camera angle didn't reveal the speaker, but I recognized the tone. Principal Greenwell, recently retired, a woman who'd once told the school assembly that accountability begins in the mirror. She was standing somewhere off-frame, her hand likely resting on Dean's chair. You've made your concern known, she added. Let's not escalate into paranoia. Verna didn't flinch. The students deserve better, Dean smiled. That I could see. A slow, practiced smirk like a man who'd rehearsed this in the mirror. This isn't about the students, Ms. Holloway, he said. This is about you refusing to let go. And then the screen went black. No fade out, no ending statement, just gone. I stared at my reflection in the darkened screen. Verna had tried. She hadn't just suspected. She'd confronted them. In that room. With that voice. And they buried her quietly, efficiently, completely. One video, one voice, sealed in a box beneath scarves. Why had my mother kept it? That thought landed like thunder in the quiet. Had she known? Had she believed her? Or was this just another artifact of a moment she was too afraid to act on? I copied the file immediately to a hidden folder on my desktop, then encrypted it. I labeled it Roots Undone. I didn't know why. It just felt right, like something returning to where it had been pulled from. I tucked the USB into a hollowed-out dictionary on my shelf. Page 314, carved in last summer when I was bored and looking for a place to hide money. It felt poetic now, something meant for small bills now carrying something priceless. That night I couldn't sleep. Not because of the video. Not because of what Verna said. Or the way Dean looked at her like she was an error in a system he'd already perfected. I couldn't sleep because of one small stupid thing. My laptop was slightly ajar, and I never left it that way. I always closed it fully, snapped the latch. It was a habit, a ritual. Even in the dark I could feel if it had been opened, that click of air pressure changing. But now it sat angled, like someone had opened it, looked inside, and forgotten to make it look untouched. I moved slowly, breath caught in my throat. Checked the recent files, nothing unusual. But I knew someone had touched it. Someone had been in my room. I looked toward the window, locked. Then toward the door, also locked. Unless it was before I locked it. Earlier that day when I left the room in a rush with the USB, when I was in her room touching her things. She could have followed, entered, checked. My mother. I lay back in bed, wide awake, eyes open to the ceiling. And I realized something more terrifying than the idea of being watched. The idea of being monitored by someone who claimed to love you. If she had seen what was on the USB, why hadn't she said anything? Why hadn't she warned me? The silence in that moment was deeper than anything I'd felt since the fall. Not just silence as absence, but silence as weapon. Silence as witness. I reached for my phone, opened a blank note, and typed, "They erase with silence. I answer with sound." And then I hit save. Tomorrow, I would begin writing Verna's name where no one could erase it again. Tomorrow, I would test how loud truth could get. Some people leave footprints, others leave echoes. I chose clay. After what I saw on that USB, the way Ms. Verna stood her ground, the way her voice was swallowed whole by a room that never intended to listen, I realized something terrifying. Evidence doesn't matter when power controls the volume. If I handed that file to the wrong person, it would disappear before it ever reached sunlight. So I stopped thinking like a student and started thinking like an artist. The next morning, I requested a materials locker in the visual arts studio. The teacher, Mr. Ryan, barely looked up from his clipboard when he handed me the key. "Working on something?" he asked. I typed on my phone a sculpture for the exhibition. He raised an eyebrow. "Theme's voiceless, you know that?" I nodded. "Good," he said, as if I had passed a test. I hadn't sculpted since 7th grade. My hands remembered more than my mind did. The slow shaping, the resistance of earth, the way heat could harden something into permanence. I knew what I needed: a bust, roughly human scale. My face, my real one, not the watered-down wallflower version people thought they knew. Eyes open, mouth parted slightly. Inside the base, I'd hide something. A tiny Bluetooth speaker wired to a receiver I could trigger remotely. The voice would come from the statue, not from me, but it would be my words. That's where the next challenge began. My voice was still gone. Physically, but not digitally. I had hours of voice recordings from class projects, voicemail messages, even clips my mom used to take on old phones, birthday wishes, bad karaoke video book reports, fragments of the girl I used to be. I pulled them all together, loaded them into a voice synthesis platform, an AI model designed for accessibility apps, and began to rebuild myself syllable by syllable. It took 3 nights, dozens of false starts, words that came out too robotic, too stitched together to sound human. But finally one sentence landed. "This is what they didn't want you to hear." The voice was familiar and foreign all at once. Not perfect, but strong. I saved the file under the name First Breath. Sarah found me 2 days later. She was in my art class, usually quiet, always drawing eyes in her notebook, eyes that never looked away. That day she arrived early and wandered to the back studio room where I was working on the bust. She saw the clay first, then the speaker parts, then me hunched over a mess of wires and unfinished facial details. I looked up startled. She froze. Her mouth opened, then closed. "Is that you?" she asked. I nodded once, slow. She stepped closer, careful not to startle anything, like she was approaching a wounded animal. "What's it for?" I typed the exhibition. She tilted her head. "You're putting a speaker in it." I hesitated, then typed again. "It's going to talk." She didn't laugh, didn't tease. Instead, she said something that stunned me. "That's kind of brilliant." I blinked. Then typed, "It's for something real, not just art." She leaned on the table, eyes scanning the rough lines of the unfinished sculpture. "Want to tell me what?" I stared at her, searching for any sign of betrayal. But there was none. Only calm curiosity. I reached for my phone and tapped open the voice memo. "Not all of it, just the first minute." Dean's voice. "She can't compete with you, you know that, right?" "Margot's she won't, she barely even speaks." Then silence. Sarah looked at me. Her lips parted, but no sound came. It was as if the words crawled back into her throat. "Is that your family?" I nodded. "That's sick." Another nod. Why are you hiding it? Why not take it to the school board?" I typed slowly this time, every word deliberate. "Because the board listens to people like him, not people like me." She didn't argue. She didn't promise things would be different. She just said, "So what can I do?" That question landed in my chest like a heartbeat. Over the next few days, Sarah became a shadow in my orbit, not heavy, not invasive, just steady. She helped me mix plaster measure symmetry, even test the speaker calibration during lunch hours when no one was around. We gave the sculpture a name Marrow, because as Sarah said, that's where the truth lives, deep, hidden, unbreakable. While I shaped clay, she tested the audiophile playback. While I stitched wires through the hollowed chest cavity, she soldered the switch that would sync to my phone. She never asked for more of the recording, never pushed for details. But one afternoon, while smoothing the curve of the cheekbone, she said quietly, "You know, I think a lot of people are waiting for someone like you to go first." I looked up. I mean, someone who's been hurt and still says something anyway. I typed, "I'm not brave." She shook her head. "You don't have to be. You just have to be loud." By Friday, Marrow was almost done. The mouth opened just enough for sound to escape. The eyes weren't hollow, they were watching. We painted her last soft tones of stone gray and ash white, a single crack down the neck deliberate. Sarah said it looked like something that had been broken and put back together. I told her that's exactly what it is. The final voice file was 6 minutes long, cut from various clips shaped into something like a statement, a confession, a warning. It opened with, "You were never supposed to hear me. They made sure of it." And it ended with, "But now I'm still here, and I'm not alone." The night before the exhibition, I slept with the sculpture in my room. Not out of sentiment, out of fear, because something in me knew after this I wouldn't be able to hide again, and someone was already watching. The invitation to join the public arts elective came in a folded slip of paper slipped onto my desk during third period. No signature, just one line typed in bold. "We need one more voice for the fall installation. If you're ready, bring something real." At first, I thought it was a mistake. Then I saw the theme posted in the art hallway later that day, "Unheard Spaces, Voices, and What's Left Behind." It wasn't a mistake. It was an opening. The elective met only twice a week in a studio space behind the old theater wing walls, covered in layered paint, half-finished sculptures, scraps of wood and wire like abandoned attempts. 10 students, one instructor, Ms. Calderon, a former muralist from Philadelphia who wore boots that left paint marks on every floor she walked. When it was my turn to introduce an idea, I typed quickly into Speak Up and let Ava's voice project the words, "I want to make something about voices that were never allowed to be voices." Ms. Calderon tilted her head. "Like censorship, like erasure," I corrected, "not just silencing strategic forgetting." The room was quiet. Then she smiled. "Sounds like you already started." I nodded, my hands were steady. For the first time in weeks, I felt taller. 2 days later, Dean found the decoy USB in my backpack. He was waiting in the kitchen when I got home, coat still on eyes cold. My mother sat at the counter not speaking, just slowly folding napkins that didn't need folding. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Dean didn't yell. He didn't need to. He held the small red USB up like a confiscated weapon. "Found this while putting away your laundry." He never put away my laundry. "You want to explain what's on it?" he asked. I reached slowly for my phone and typed, "My portfolio, for art class." His fingers twitched around the drive. "Funny, doesn't look like art." He plugged it into his laptop right there on the kitchen island and opened the only folder labeled Voice. It was empty. Or rather, it appeared to be, except for 30 black and white photos of molding clay notes on sculpture technique and one video file of me typing silently at a desk while an AI voice read Shakespeare. It was my decoy, a mirrored copy I built just in case. I kept the real file buried 3 folders deep on my own locked drive, hidden behind a password-protected .zip labeled Algebra Homework. Dean didn't say anything for a while. "Then we're watching you. Don't think you can hide behind broken speech." He tossed the USB onto the counter. "Keep your art in your classroom, Ivy. Not in this house." And then he left. My mother exhaled barely audible. I wanted her to say something. Anything. But all she said was don't antagonize him, as if self-preservation had a rule book. That night, Margot came into my room without knocking. She closed the door behind her, not softly. Her heels clicked once on the wood floor. She stood near my desk where the sculpture bust sat under a cloth. She didn't touch it, but she stared like it had whispered something offensive. "I know what you're doing," she said. I didn't move. "I don't know how you convinced Sarah to help you. She's too soft. Always was." Still, I didn't respond. Margot stepped closer. "You think this little project makes you powerful?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It makes you visible, Ivy. And that's not a good thing. Not for you. Not in this house." I looked up at her steady. She leaned in just enough to lower her voice. "Come lang," she said, each syllable crisp. "Van con la lựa chọn tốt nhất cho mày." Her voice was sweet, almost pitying. "But if you want to be stupid, if you want to scream into rooms where no one listens, don't say I didn't warn you." She turned to leave, and then I spoke. Not with Ava's voice, not with my phone, with mine. Rough, strained, but mine. "You're scared." Just 2 words. They scraped from my throat like stones dragged across gravel. Margot froze. Her hand rested on the doorknob. For a moment, I thought she might pretend she hadn't heard. Pretend my voice was still broken. But her shoulders tensed. "You should be," I added. A whisper, but sharp. She didn't turn around. She just opened the door and walked out. The silence she left behind wasn't empty. It was electric. The next day, I returned to the studio. Miss Calderon noticed it immediately, the shift in me. I didn't hide behind my phone. I didn't use Ava's voice. I walked up to the class with the bust in my hands. "This is Marrow," I said aloud. My voice cracked on the last syllable. One student looked up surprised. Another smiled faintly. I set the sculpture on the center table and peeled back the cloth. "She's not finished," I added, "but she speaks." I clicked the remote in my pocket. The Bluetooth speaker hummed to life, and my rebuilt voice, the AI hybrid, began to play. "This is what they didn't want you to hear." The words echoed off the studio walls. No one laughed. No one spoke. They listened. Ms. Calderon stood beside me, arms crossed. Sometimes she said, "Art doesn't ask for permission." I nodded. My throat burned. But I didn't care. Because for the first time in weeks, I wasn't surviving. I was showing my teeth. The night of the exhibition smelled like fresh paint, metal, and nerves. You could feel it in the hallway, buzzing under the tiles, humming through the concrete. The school's gymnasium had been transformed into a gallery, folding walls covered in student work rows of flickering clip lights, names printed under every piece like they finally meant something. Mine was at the center, a sculpture on a black pedestal. Pale, cracked clay, mouth open, eyes hollowed just enough to seem alert. The piece didn't scream. It didn't need to. It watched. I named it The Silent Truth. It didn't have an artist's card, only a title and a small square plaque that read, "Press play to listen." The crowd began to arrive. Students, teachers, parents. Sarah stood near the entrance, handing out printed pamphlets with the floor plan. Her eyes caught mine briefly across the room. A nod. A signal. Dean was there, in a gray suit, pretending not to scan for anything out of place. My mother followed a step behind, wearing silence like a scarf. And Margot. She glided in 10 minutes late, cheeks rouged, dress crisp. She laughed at something someone said near the juice table. None of them saw me. I was backstage, technically off limits, behind the velvet curtain where the drama club usually stored props. My heart was steady, not calm, not panicked, just steady. Miss Calderon had helped me rig the trigger. A single remote tucked in my palm. When I pressed it, the sculpture speaker would come to life, Bluetooth synced, volume set. I waited until the room was full. Until the air had gone dense with anticipation, until every voice had lowered to a hush without knowing why. Then I pressed the button. The first sound wasn't speech. It was breath. A single inhale edited real unmistakable. Then my voice. Not the AI one. Mine. Reconstructed from pain and code and will. Projected through the clay like confession. "I am Ivy Quinn. A murmur rippled. "And this is what they did to me!" I heard someone gasp. The next 30 seconds played without interruption. Dean's voice recorded in the hallway, clear and calculated. "She can't compete with you. You know that, right?" Then Margot's response, sweet, sharp. "She won't. She barely even speaks in class." The sculpture's face didn't move, but the voice seemed to pour out of it. The room was frozen. Even the air felt still. The playback continued. Snippets from the Verna video stitched just enough to make meaning without naming names. No slander, just truth. Then the final line, "Silence was never mine. It was assigned to me." A beat of quiet. Then the room exhaled all at once. People turned looking for me, my name now a ghost in every glance. I stepped out from behind the curtain. No spotlight, no music. Just me in a black sweater, hair tied back, standing on the hardwood floor like it was a witness box. I walked toward the sculpture, past Dean's stunned face, saw Margot's painted expression crack just slightly. I stood next to the pedestal. Then I opened my mouth and spoke. I'm not silent anymore. My voice wasn't loud. It cracked halfway through the sentence, but it didn't shake. It didn't apologize. It landed. The teachers looked at each other. A few students took out their phones, then lowered them like they weren't sure if this was a performance or a revolution. Dean took one step forward. I held my ground. He stopped. Margot's hands curled into fists at her sides. My mother's lips parted, but no words came. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, like she didn't know who she was watching anymore. I turned toward the crowd and said louder this time, "There are things this school covers up, voices it buries, but not tonight." I didn't read from a script. I didn't press another button. I just stood there, my voice still hoarse, still rough, but mine, and spoke the words I had once whispered only to my pillow. I was told I should stay quiet, that silence was safer, that I was too dramatic, that the truth would ruin things. I paused. It didn't ruin me. I looked straight at Dean when I said it. And it won't save them. The audience didn't cheer, not yet. They just listened. Truly listened. It was enough. I stepped back, let the sculpture speak again just once more. "If you're hearing this, you're part of it now." And then I walked away. Not backstage. Through the center aisle. Past Dean. Past Margot. Past everyone who once forgot I was there. The silent truth had a name now. And she wasn't going back into the clay. By Monday morning, the front office smelled like paper and panic. The exhibition had ended 3 nights earlier, but its echo hadn't faded. What started as an art event had rolled into something else, something heavier, louder. Every hallway conversation now had a hush built in. People stared not with pity, but with calculation, as if everyone was trying to figure out what they had missed. What else might still be hiding? At 7:52 a.m., Principal Greenwell's name was scrubbed from the main staff directory. By 9 hours, a district vehicle pulled into the back parking lot, 2 officials, 1 clipboard, 1 sealed folder. At 10:17, Dean Burton was summoned to the conference room. He never came back out. The news hit like a dropped glass. Quiet at first, then everywhere. Students whispered. Teachers stared at their email inboxes like they were waiting for permission to feel something. In homeroom, a senior boy leaned over and said, "Is it true you got the principal fired?" I looked at him, flatly didn't answer. He nodded anyway, like I had. By 3rd period, Margot was missing. She didn't show up to AP Lit, which was unheard of. That class was her temple, her kingdom. The only thing she loved more than praise was being first. Instead, she was in the main office. A closed-door meeting with the interim principal, Ms. Elkins, a woman who used to teach chemistry, but now sat at the head of a very different kind of reaction. According to Sarah, who passed by during her hall pass, Ms. Elkins wasn't smiling. She told Margot they're reopening the files, Sarah whispered to me in the stairwell. All of them. Past 3 years, scholarship nominations, academic awards, internal votes. I blinked. Sarah continued. Apparently, some files were reformatted manually. And guess whose name was attached to the override credentials? She didn't have to say it. I already knew. Dean and Margot. Together, systematic and deliberate. I don't think she saw this coming, Sarah added. No one ever does until the walls shift. That afternoon, I found my mother in the kitchen. She was standing in front of the sink, not washing anything. Just standing. Her hands resting on the edge like the porcelain might anchor her to the moment. She didn't turn when I entered. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she said without turning her head, "You changed things." I waited. People are talking. The school, the neighborhood, the district sent an investigator to our house this morning while you were gone. I pulled out a chair. She looked at me then. Her eyes were tired, rimmed with a kind of age that doesn't come from years, it comes from regret. "Is it all true?" she asked. "What they said about your stepfather, about Margot, what you said in that recording?" Her voice trailed off, not because she didn't want the answer, but because she already knew it. I reached into my backpack and pulled out the original USB, the one with everything. The hallway recording, the Verna footage, the log of deleted names, the broken pattern they thought no one had noticed. I placed it in her palm, not dramatically, just honestly. She looked down at it, didn't close her fingers, didn't blink. "I can't protect you if this is real," she whispered. I leaned in. My voice was hoarse from the exhibition, but steady. "You weren't protecting me before." She flinched. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. Then I stood and walked away, leaving the USB in her hand. Not to hurt her, to make her choose. That night I heard her crying through the wall. Soft, muffled, long. It was the first sound I'd ever heard from her that wasn't meant for show. And still I didn't go in. I'd done my part. Now it was her turn. The next day, the student paper published a headline, "Scholarship Process Under Investigation, Anonymity Lifted After Student Testimony." The article didn't name me, but it didn't need to. They called me the artist, the girl with the voice inside the clay. I liked that. Let them wonder. Let them lean closer next time before they decide who matters. Let them ask themselves what other voices they'd learn to filter out. Later that week, I got called to the office not by the administration, but by the District Integrity Committee. They asked for a statement. I gave them 2 files, a typed timeline, and a list of names. At the bottom, I included one line. Ms. Verna tried to speak. "You didn't listen then. This is your second chance." The man in the suit didn't look at me, but the woman beside him did, and she nodded. Like maybe finally someone in power remembered how to hear. Back home, my mother never returned the USB, but the next day, Dean's briefcase disappeared from the hallway, and his name disappeared from the mailbox. That was enough. For now. It began with the headline, big, centered, bold. Printed on the front page of the school newspaper and stacked high outside the media center like someone wanted it to be found. The girl who wouldn't stay silent, Ivy Quinn, and the scholarship beneath the surface. Underneath it was a grainy photo of the sculpture The Silent Truth. Its cracked mouth slightly open, the clay still unpainted. No spotlight, no filters, just raw weight and shadow. Someone had finally printed the truth, not as a rumor, not whispered in hallways, but in ink, on paper, with a byline. The article traced everything from the exhibition night to the USB files, the voice reconstruction, the Verna footage, and the investigation now sweeping through the district's archives. It didn't accuse directly. It didn't need to. The facts did their own work. A small sidebar listed named students whose scholarship files were being reopened. Durant, Keene, Maya, a few others including mine labeled as flagged with irregularities. Sarah handed me a copy in homeroom, eyes wide. "They asked me to fact-check," she said. I told them not a single word was exaggerated. I didn't respond, just ran my fingers across the paper. Ink didn't lie the way people did. 2 days later, a guest walked into the building during 4th period. She wore a navy trench coat, heels with scuffed edges, and a lanyard that hadn't been clipped to her neck in over a year. Ms. Verna. I saw her through the narrow window in the hallway door, standing beside the new interim principal and the district integrity officer. She didn't look nervous. She looked returned. Some of the teachers gasped when they saw her. Others avoided eye contact. No one clapped. No one asked questions. She went straight to the library and then into the staff lounge. 20 minutes later, the PA buzzed once. All parents and guardians attending tonight's open forum are encouraged to join the media center at 6:30 p.m. for a presentation regarding student affairs and procedural transparency. They didn't use the word investigation, but they didn't hide anymore either. That night, the Verna video played on the projector. It wasn't dramatic, no thunderclap music, no special effects, just her voice, in that same boardroom, saying what she tried to say before they cut her off. I believe several student files have been edited to favor certain individuals. I am requesting a third-party audit. Then Dean's voice, cold, almost amused. This isn't about the students, Verna. This is about you refusing to let go. Then Principal Greenwell's voice, the blade in velvet. You're digging your own grave. The room went silent. Parents shifted in their seats. A few stood. Some left, but most stayed, faces taut, lips pressed into hard lines. For once, the adults weren't leading the story. They were finally catching up to it. Afterward, Ms. Verna stood beside the screen and read from a small sheet of paper. I left because I thought silence would protect me. I was wrong. It only protected them. She didn't say names, but she didn't need to. That was my job. The next morning, the halls were covered in paper. Taped to lockers, stuck to windows, fluttering from bulletin boards like petals in a slow-motion storm. Each one bore a sentence in thick black ink. Words I once only typed, or whispered, or swallowed. Sarah had printed them. She didn't ask permission. She didn't need it. One read, "Silence isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of fear." Another, "They erased me before I even had the chance to speak." And this one right outside the main office door, "I'm not loud. I'm just no longer invisible." Some students stared. Some peeled them down. Some took photos and posted them online with captions like, "She said it first, now we all will." I walked the hall without headphones, without my hoodie up. My name was being said now, but not behind my back. And not as a secret. Ivy Quinn. The girl who made Clay speak. The girl who wouldn't be erased. The news about Dean came on a Wednesday morning. There was no formal announcement, just a memo from the district superintendent quietly circulated to staff and posted for legal transparency. Pending further investigation into multiple breaches of academic ethics and procedural conduct, Dean Burton has been placed on indefinite administrative leave and removed from all decision-making roles. His teaching certification is under review. The phrasing was diplomatic, but the message was clear. The man who once dictated futures had no more authority over anyone's. That same afternoon, a second email followed this one from the International Academic Fellowship Program, effective immediately. Margot Quinn's application for global nomination has been voided due to unresolved conflicts in recommendation integrity and file tampering. She hadn't been seen at school all week. Rumors said she'd been pulled from classes. Others said she was finishing senior year online. Someone claimed they saw her at the registrar's office crying into her sleeve, her mother whispering too loudly beside her. I didn't go looking. There were no apologies, no dramatic confrontations, no screaming across the dinner table. Just space and distance, and the slow retreat of a system that no longer had the strength to hold its shape. 3 weeks later, my name was called at the state auditorium in front of 200 students from across the region. Ivy Quinn, the announcer, said recipient of the State Impact Grant in Visual Advocacy for her project Voice Through Clay. I walked across the stage wearing all black fingers still smudged with dry glaze from working late in the studio the night before. The applause came gently, not out of politeness, but reverence, like they understood. I didn't wave, didn't bow, just nodded once and took the folder. Inside was the scholarship confirmation, a stipend for material expansion, and a handwritten note from one of the review board judges. It read, "What you made doesn't just speak, it confronts. Thank you for reminding us that art isn't decoration, it's declaration." I read it twice before folding it carefully and placing it back inside. I wasn't used to being seen and understood, but I was getting there. The following month, I launched Thapjeong. In English, we called it Ignite Voice, an open-door group for students who had once been silenced, sidelined, or spoken over. There was no formal structure at first, just a circle in the art room every Thursday after school, some donated chairs, and a ceramic bowl where people could drop stories anonymously if they weren't ready to speak aloud. Some came just to sit. Some cried the moment they opened their mouths. Some handed me notes I didn't read until I was alone in bed with my lamp dimmed. One girl named Elise typed her testimony and folded it inside an origami crane. They told me I was overreacting, it said. Thank you for proving that telling the truth isn't a weakness. I never replied, just folded the crane again and placed it on the shelf beside Marrow, which now sat in my bedroom, lit softly by a corner lamp. She still spoke sometimes, only when I needed reminding. At the spring school assembly, they asked me to speak. Not as a victim, not even as an award recipient, but as a voice. One that had once been missing, and now wasn't. I wore a plain white button-up black jeans, no makeup. I stood in front of the podium, gripping the mic with both hands, not from fear, but steadiness. The lights overhead buzzed like they were holding their breath. The students watched. And I began. Silence used to be where I hid. A pause. I thought it made me safe, made me small enough to survive. Another pause. But the truth is, silence only protected the people who didn't want to be exposed. The gym didn't move. No coughs, no shuffling papers, just stillness. I took a breath. They said I was a blur. Background noise, a shadow in the corner of a photo. I let the weight settle. But clay remembers the hands that shape it, and voices once found don't go quiet again. Then I said the words I'd practiced for weeks. The ones I knew would outlive me. Silence used to be the place I hid. Now it's the place I walk out of. I stepped back, set the microphone down, and let the moment close around me, not like a trap, like a doorway. The photograph was pinned on Ivy's bedroom wall, the last empty space beside her bookshelf, now filled with a moment she never thought would exist. It was a selfie, simple, unedited. She stood in front of her sculpture, Marrow, the statue that once spoke in her place. Its clay face frozen mid-whisper, eyes closed, mouth slightly parted as if still listening. Behind her in the shot were rows of blurred figures, students, teachers, parents, strangers standing clapping, some with their hands over their mouths. Shock, awe, relief. They were there. Witnesses. The photograph had gone viral on the school's online bulletin, then made its way into the regional art board's digital catalog. It was picked up by a national curator looking for works that shaped public discourse through personal expression. Ivy hadn't even submitted it. Someone else had. Weeks later, it appeared at the National Student Arts and Justice Exhibition in Boston. Printed 7 feet tall, mounted on a white wall with a single quote underneath. This isn't where I stopped. This is where I was first heard. People paused in front of it for minutes at a time. Some cried. Others took out their phones trying to capture something in the silence the photo left behind. And Ivy, she didn't attend the exhibit. Not out of fear, not from shame, but because she had somewhere else to be. On the final day of term, Ivy walked into the school's main art room, now quiet after months of community chaos and media attention. She wasn't scheduled for a class. No one expected her to show up, but she had her keys, her sketchbook, and an untouched block of cold-pressed paper tucked under one arm. She chose the desk nearest the window, the one no one ever liked, because it faced the storage closet instead of the mural wall. She liked that. No distractions, no shadows from other students, just space. The kind of quiet she now claimed as her own. She set down her materials gently. A box of graphite pencils, an eraser wrapped in tissue, and a folded letter from the state board confirming that voice through clay would be integrated into the next art therapy curriculum for public schools. She didn't open it again. Didn't need to. She already knew. She pulled her hair back with a loose tie and opened the sketchbook to a fresh page. No lines, no borders, just possibility. The first lines she drew weren't of faces. They were not replicas of trauma. not portraits of the past. Just strokes, quick, deliberate, building a shape that hadn't existed yet. One not tied to memory or evidence or vindication. Something that could only grow now that the soil had been cleared. She drew for 30 minutes without lifting her head. She didn't check her phone, didn't listen for footsteps in the hallway, didn't expect applause. There was none. There didn't need to be. There was only the sound of the pencil against paper. Soft, steady, certain. She smiled barely, not from triumph, but from release. And for the first time, Ivy Quinn wasn't fighting to be heard. She was simply telling her story,